Derek decides to eat when we're playing Destiny. I got potato skins I gotta eat.
Eat your mic, bro.
You guys are now live.
Oh, now we're live.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the D&D Dungeon Masters Roundtable. We have gathered up a collection of esteemed, noted, revered Dungeon Masters from around the building. It's not a small feat to pluck the very best Dungeon Masters from these hallowed halls, and we have them with you today. We're going to talk about dungeon mastering, obviously, in the new edition. Some tips, tricks, advice, things that you guys have possibly learned from one another or from playing in each other's games. I am Shelley Mazanoble, and I'm joined here by my buddy Trevor. We're going to be moderating this event. We have gotten questions. A lot of questions came through on Twitter when we announced that we were doing this. I think Trevor and I have a few questions of our own. It's very exciting as we are sitting in this room with our Dungeon Master. So we might learn a few tips and tricks of our own.
There we go. It's like, so what do you have planned for next week?
I can tell you, we know at least.
I'm going to kill you.
When you do this. Yes, that means some bad things really bad is going to happen.
I have played with him too.
So some of our Dungeon Masters are probably familiar to many of you from previous live streams or from being a guest on our podcast, like Sarah. But to begin with, can we just go around the room and you could just reintroduce yourselves and tell us how long you've been Dungeon Mastering. Rodney, we'll start with you.
Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Rodney Thompson. I am a senior game designer on Dungeons & Dragons, and I've been DMing for about 20 years, I would say.
So even before you were born.
That is not accurate.
A teenage prodigy.
Indeed.
Rodney's actually 17. He's Benjamin buttoning his way to
He is.
Thank you, Mr. Morales.
That's amazing.
So I'm Mike Merles. I'm the senior manager for the R&D team, and I've been DMing. Well, my birthday's this week, so it just reminds me. I've been DMing for like 30-something years because I'm old.
You're an Aquarius?
Yes.
I didn't know that. I am too.
I thought Aquarius was lame. He's the guy carrying the jug of water. Like he's there.
Who
like
can survive without water?
But he's like the water boy for like the awesome ones.
It's the Dungeon Master of the Zodiac.
There's like the guy with the
The
bow.
Dungeon Master of the
You
Zodiac.
can't do anything without water.
There's like the giant crab. There's the guy with the flamethrower. Like
All need water.
I'm a
Yes.
centaur who shoots bows.
I mean, Larry Bird needed water, but no one like puts his water boys. You know, his water boys on the whole thing.
Aquarian's rule.
So, I mean, I'm cool being Aquarian, but.
If you must.
Anyways, next episode is when we'll tackle the Zodiac.
Yeah. You might need a Zodiac chart in the next.
Exactly.
Okay.
Using the Zodiac in your D.
I'm Sarah Kirchie, and I've been DMing for about 5 or 6 years now, I think. Started DMing after I came to work here for Wizards and had a wonderful opportunity to get started.
I'm Chris Lindsay. I am on the Dungeons & Dragons brand team, and I've been dungeon mastering since about 1980, which makes me really old.
That's the year I was born.
Thanks, Rodney.
I actually played in his D&D campaign the year I was born.
Yes. Again,
Yeah.
a prodigy.
Yes.
So we obviously have the Dungeon Master's Guide that came out at the end of last year. People have been really excited about what they've been seeing in it. But probably some noted changes from. Sarah, have you experienced dungeon mastering? And you've obviously played in previous editions.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You guys have obviously all played in previous editions. So what in your opinion, do you think is the biggest change in this edition with dungeon mastering?
I don't know. In some ways, it feels like it's the most. Like my skills are. I haven't really had to relearn too much other than the mechanics. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's really lame non-answer. Like nothing has changed. I think most of the changes are around kind of getting a little more, like for me, I don't really use miniatures anymore. I use them all the time in 3rd and 4th edition. Mm-hmm. So it's been kind of an interesting change there. Like, and I actually kind of find I'm kind of happy not using them now. I still collect them. I still use them occasionally, but it's no longer a default thing. So.
Yeah, I use the minis just if I need to use them for a prop, just to kind of illustrate what's going on. But otherwise, without the minis, things run so much faster.
Yeah, I would say that the biggest change over to this edition is it has done wonders for the pacing of my game. I can keep things moving along a nice little clip, and and keep everybody excited, surprised, and scared all at the same time.
That is true. We can attest to that.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm obviously biased having worked on it, but what I found is the best part about it is that I'm kind of able to do what I've always done, and it just so happens that it plays by the rules now, right? And like what I really like to do is run a game where my players tell me what they do, and then we find like the quickest and easiest way to accomplish that, and then go. It turns out that's actually how things are supposed to work, right? And so like I kind of got to help design an edition of D&D that matched my DMing style in a lot of ways, but I think that sort of quick resolution method is one of the biggest things that I see as a big boon of 5th design.
Yeah. I know a lot of people love the tables, the trinket tables. We were talking about them yesterday, the random dungeon encounter tables. Those are all pretty awesome. So I have a question that this came across on Twitter, and I'm very interested in the answer to this as our dungeon master is in the room. I like this question a lot. How do you personally decide when, if ever, to save a PC by fudging a rule or a die roll so they don't die? Do you do that? Is there times when it is better, acceptable, okay to fudge the rules a little bit just for the sake of the players?
If I see tears in the eyes, usually it's like, oh, I don't want to make them cry. I better not do that.
You want them to come back?
Yeah, when I want someone to come back to my game. That's so if your character ever dies, you take that hint, by the way.
Oh,
No, I'm kidding. No, I'm
not
sorry.
invited back.
Man, my character's died 3 sessions in a row. That's
Every
weird.
game I go to, a character dies.
Especially if you die by phone on the way to the session. Hey, your character died, don't bother showing up.
Is anyone else there? No.
Is anyone else?
I don't fudge the dice roll, but I'll occasionally bring in some sort of element that helps, gives them an out. In fact, I did this recently in playing Court of the Dragon Queen. The party it was a looming TPK, and I gave an out of the weakest character as far as fighting skills. I had the main bad guy just sort of push him out of the way as if I'll come back to you later, and it just happened that character who never hits anything rolled a crit against the bad guy who had 4 hit points left and took him out, and it just saved the day. And it, so it wasn't, wasn't a change of the dice roll, but it was definitely, you give them just one little option. Can you get this? Can you bring it back? And you allow them to try and use their wits to take advantage of that.
I have never fudged a dice roll in my life on behalf of the player characters.
It's a lie.
Usually it happens when that player has had a horrible series of luck. They've done everything right that night, but their dice hate them for some reason, and then I will choose to maybe do something a little different behind the screen with regards to how I interpret the numbers on the dice.
Okay.
And then things swing their way a little bit, maybe. Yeah, keep them alive.
Bank error in your favor.
Yes. But, I mean, you can never save that player who just decides to make a really horrible decision, particularly if they're a hot roller. They're dead.
Yeah.
Dead.
I think it's pretty rare that I actually fudge the dice, but I will change how I would adjudicate something sometimes. So, if I tend to reward awesomeness, and by that I mean if there's a minecart and you go jump in that minecart and go careening off in that minecart, I'm going to reward you for that, right? And so what I'll do is, instead of fudging dice rolls, I might say, okay, normally I would say this is like a DC 15, I'll say DC 10 this time, right? Just because I want there to be awesome, memorable scenes that happen, especially when it's a player initiating it. Getting a player to initiate something exciting or memorable is, I won't say super rare, but it's something that doesn't come along every session, right? And anytime I see an opportunity for my players to create a story that they're going to be telling sitting around a bar 10 years from now, I will almost always say, you know what, we're going to throw out all the normal harsh penalties that I might impose for this ridiculous minecart chase and just let it happen.
And that, how often do you just throw out dice rolls completely? If the player is telling a cool story with you, or if they're I want to do this thing and it's totally in their character and stuff, do you just kind of ignore the dice roll sometimes?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably more. I'm more likely to rather just not introduce a die roll to something where a bad die roll could derail something interesting, or your example of the villain, right? It's instead of the villain attacking, the villain does something else, or the villain says, well, if you surrender, things like that. More relying on something happening in the game than worrying about how a die roll, like saying, oh, I rolled a nat 20, I'm going to say, oh, you missed, and even though I know it was a crit. Yeah. I kind of like try to fight. But I would admit,
The story is so important.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But I'll admit, when I was a beginning DM, I would fudge the dice all the time. Because I wouldn't want my villain to die, or they weren't supposed to find the secret door yet, or something like that. So especially when I was younger, I would do that all the time. It was just an easy way to just kind of, until I had a little bit more sense of how a story can evolve or how things can work out, I would just like, oh no, you missed. Or like even in the opposite, I mean, if the wyvern's attacking the party and it's just a random encounter, and I roll 3 attacks, they all hit. Oh, he hits you twice, right? Or instead of 3 times, just things like that. But that's definitely probably more what I would even say, and I'd say the 90s when I was playing AD&D versus 3rd or 4th edition and 5th, where the system's a bit more predictable. Where you can say, hey, I know how powerful the wyvern is compared to the party. I think we don't, sort of modern D&D doesn't need that as much if you're DMing in that mode, because you have a bit more sense of how powerful something is compared to a player character.
I'll also be more forgiving if I've made a mistake, like if I failed to communicate some important information to the players, like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot to drop all the clues that there's a green dragon in this den, right? Like, that's happened occasionally where I'm like, dum. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you guys that thing. Like, then I will definitely be more forgiving, because that's not their fault, right? That they walked right into it. It's mine.
Yeah. And then I think on top of that, if the players do something rash, like if they attack the dragon, then the dragon's trying to talk to them, and they just attack, or whatever, they're going to die. Right? This is how that works.
Stupidity is stupidity.
Yeah.
Sometimes, though, I think it's okay to let the player character die if you have a really interesting way to bring that character back somehow. Like, I totally had a character die in the most unlucky, horrible fashion. We all felt horrible about it, but I knew I was going to bring that character back as a revenant and give them this huge quest to, get back their life, right? And so they played that out, and it was really awesome.
Yeah.
What happened to Rodney in our Amanda campaign?
Yeah, that was actually my character's entire story arc in Perkins' campaign. Was I died at 3rd level as a wizard, came back as an Avenger, and was basically, that was the next 27 levels of the campaign.
Sounds like karma.
Yeah.
So do you know that? Is it in your mind, if anyone dies, I'm going to have this happen?
Nope, sometimes I do know it, sometimes I literally just make that up right on the spot.
Yeah. I think it depends if the player's really attached to the character. They really like the concept.
You do that for the player.
Or if there's a cool story behind the character, so death just kind of makes it more interesting.
Interesting.
I want to go back to something Rodney said. He talked about dropping clues, and then when he failed to do that, he would give his players some benefit. So clues and mysteries and unraveling them is something that we hear a lot about when we're talking about how to add that level of intrigue in the campaigns. What do you guys do when you have stuff that you want the players to figure out, but you don't necessarily want to rely on a roll because then they might not figure it out? Well, how do you guys handle, here are these clues that you know they need to get. How do you guys handle that individually? We'll start with Chris this time. This way.
Oh my dear Lord. Sometimes you have to get heavy-handed with the hints. There's a little alliteration for you there. For the players, when you don't want to rely on a die roll, but you want them to puzzle something out for themselves, because then that's essentially what you've done, is you provided them a puzzle to kind of unfold, and so you have to sort of lay it out for them and be willing to allow that mystery to exist for longer than you expected it to.
Yes.
Chris will say things like, do you want to look at the well? No, there's nothing here.
No, we're good.
Okay, so nobody is going to the well.
That's also when the DM wants to do the dangerous things. Like, are you sure you don't want to punch the dragon in the face? Are you positive? I mean,
I can't
something cool could happen.
You'll solve the mystery of what happens when you punch a dragon in the face.
That is a good question, because I do feel like sometimes we're doing it wrong. Like, you have an intention of what you want to happen, and we're just running in circles, or not asking questions, or not forgetting to check for secret doors or traps. Sometimes that happens.
Yeah, you might just throw a random event in that draws attention to something that they hadn't caught attention to before. Like maybe have a wandering guard group come through and they draw the characters over into the area that you're trying to get them to look at, that they just haven't gone over and looked at. Things like that can bring them
A
around.
pack of cattle dogs jumps
Yes.
out and herds the players into a room.
Correct.
I mean, mysteries are hard. I actually think mysteries are some of the hardest adventures to run, and that's why, like, I actually tend to not run the adventures that are like, okay, this adventure is a mystery. There are whole role-playing game systems built around, like, how to run a mystery, right? Like the Gumshoe system, for example, right? I think that when I run a mystery, I take a really long view, like Chris said about, like, oh, okay, this is something they're going to unravel over a long period of time. That's the better kind of mystery for me to run in a D&D campaign, because I can drop hints here and there, or I can communicate, a clue through an interlude or through an adventure. And I don't have to rely on the player solving that mystery in order for the adventure to keep moving forward, right? Because that's what you never want to do, is you never want to hit that wall of, okay, they didn't figure out my clues, now gadonk, the adventure is done, or resort to, and now here's the blindingly obvious clue that I have to give you, which then cheapens the mystery, right? And the players didn't get that joy of figuring it out themselves.
I always try to, if there's a mystery, I always try to put it as one path to an endpoint, and I also try to never make the mystery the endpoint, because I'm really bad at running mystery adventures. Because in my experience, if I think the puzzle is easy, the players will never get it. And if I think the puzzle is a real brain burner, they'll just blurt out the answers. Like halfway through explaining,
That happens every time.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so, like, one of the things I'll try to do is, I like putting in, like, layers, especially when I build a dungeon. So I created this dungeon, it was like this temple to Poseidon kind of thing. And there was this offering chamber where if you did a certain sequence of events, the room would flood and potentially kill everyone in it. But if you figured out how the different objects in the room work, you could stop the ritual, like, essentially complete the ritual without people drowning. But so that was a bit of a puzzle aspect. If you did that, you ended up getting like this circlet that could then be used to open up other parts of the dungeon. But I also just put in the possibility you could just beat the door down and escape that way. But if you did that, you didn't get the kind of, and I made sure that in the designing the dungeon, that little item was a nice perk to have. It kind of gave you access to some secret areas that otherwise might be hard to find, but it wasn't necessary.
So cool cure doesn't stop you from advancing. So.
Yeah, I always think of it like the bit of chrome on top of everything in this. If you solve the mystery, you get more, but you don't need, because players being players, I always assume, okay, I have to make sure they can kill stuff and break stuff in order to solve, like, and as long as there's a path that supports that, then they'll eventually get to the end,
So where do you find your inspiration for your games? Like when you're talking about building a puzzle or building a dungeon or just creating great stories, are you like reading a book and you're like, this would be an awesome thing for my game, or a news story or a TV show, or where does inspiration find it?
I think playing like other games,
yeah.
I play video games and stuff to get some ideas.
Yeah, I definitely have inserted puzzles and characters and just storylines from other games. Yeah.
There was a game called Darkest Dungeon. I think it's on Steam. Like, I think it's the early access program. I just started playing it and I was like, oh, that's the idea that this ruined, mansion with this dark secret, and like the main character is kind of coming back and recruiting adventurers to go find his heritage or something like that. It's like just the ambiance. It was kind of cool and kind of gets me thinking of ideas. So.
Movies. I borrow heavily, shamelessly from movies. Particularly old, like really cheesy 80s science fiction and fantasy movies sometimes are the best things to like steal from, strip it out, switch it around, throw it back in.
I tend to pull a lot from classic fantasy books for storylines, but then also for characters. A lot of times what I'll do for inspiration is look at specific actors in movies or their specific performances and say, okay, I want to model this NPC's mannerisms after this character in this movie or TV show or whatever, right? Because I am not great at crafting my own unique accents and mannerisms, but I can really do a good job of grabbing, okay, I'm going to grab this guy's accent and this guy's mannerisms and smush them together, and now that's an NPC. So I look at things I can mimic easily for my NPCs.
Okay. So this was another question that came up on Twitter. It's two-part. How do I make combat exciting? And conversely, how do I make sure that my players aren't getting bored when they're not in combat? Because there are, it seems like, always two types of players. That people who really love the combat, and then there's the people who really love the storytelling and the role-playing and the puzzle solving. So how do you balance that with your player groups?
I think with combat, a lot of it is I've done this a couple times where if there's the area the fight's taking place, I'll actually write down interesting stuff on index cards and put them on my screen so the players know, hey, here's this stuff like there's this weird altar, or there's a curtain hanging halfway through the room, to get people to think, hey, I should do stuff with that, or even have creatures do interesting things with them. I think it was one of the live stream games we did. I did something like that. When we were running the slave boards a couple years ago for a playtest for 5th. I think things that are unique to the situation that also encourage creativity really help. So rather than just saying like, oh, if you stand on this spot, you get +5 fire damage or whatever, where it's just very rote. It's not really different. It's just, it's just a very straight line feature, as opposed to things that are like, oh, there's, you're fighting in a statuary and the statues are all kind of, you could knock one over, or you could jump, if you're a halfling, maybe jump on top of one, or things like that. Things that get players to start thinking of them as tools, with the outcome like I might not necessarily know what a player is supposed to do, and also things that, especially in the moment, might encourage some element of improvised action that is memorable. So I think it's just kind of putting in little toys. If there's going to be a fight and you want to make it interesting, put little toys for people to play with on the map.
Yeah, and I think if you introduce your NPCs or the monsters as using those props sometimes too, it triggers your players to think about using them as well. So you might have, the villain grab a curtain and come sliding across the room and use that as a charge attack, and it might encourage them to, oh, well, there's another curtain over there. I'm going to try, it just, triggers their imaginations.
I really like to play with the terrain in the thing. It's the same idea as what Mike is talking about, but and it's more complex than just like including rough terrain in the encounter. Right? You put in things that interact with the player characters that aren't necessarily fighting them, but there's still obstacles that they have to encounter. Swinging blades are always a fan favorite. Fill them up with water slowly over time while they're fighting something is also, really
a rotating tunnel full of fiery oil.
I don't know what you're talking about. Sometimes they get really elaborate.
I should point out,
I'm still burning from that one.
The two of us are currently playing an adventure that Chris is running that I think is adapted from something Rodney wrote. Is that what's going on?
I don't remember who.
The Razor Blade Room?
Okay.
That none of us can enter?
What's the name of the adventure?
Eyes of the Lich Queen.
No, that wasn't me.
Okay.
I'd
love to take credit for it, but no.
I don't remember who the authors were of the adventure, but this got some fantastic elements in it.
Yeah.
It's good.
Another thing is give your monsters some personality, so they're not fighting just to beat down the players.
Yep.
And one of my favorite memories of D&D was, I forget, it was a couple of years ago, running an adventure that some kobolds ambushed the characters in a dungeon, and one of the characters got knocked prone and dropped his sword. So the kobolds weren't there to fight to the death. I mean, they're not these fanatics. They're just there to steal stuff. So the kobolds grabbed the fighter's sword and they all ran off. And that was like more memorable than anything of like, what? I need my sword back, right? Like now the fighter has he's stuck with his dagger or a club, and it was just this nice, hilarious little turn. And so I like to think of the monsters, especially humanoids, as hey, these guys aren't here to fight to the death. Like they're fighting for a reason. And so that alone could be something that actually adds some texture, or they're here to kill one character, or they're just defending their turf. So if you start talking to them, and that's another way, like segueing into the role-playing question, I think if the best combats are ones that include a role-playing element, where there is like people are talking during the fight. Like most fight scenes, really good fight scenes in any story where there's a conflict between two characters also includes dialogue, right? It's not just silent. Like Vader and Luke don't fight in silence while the Emperor
I remember that.
Yeah, because it's about their relationship. That's what the fight's about. Yeah, and the Emperor and all that other stuff. So I think having that, if you want to find a way to make role playing interesting, is have role playing occur during a battle. Where the players, the characters are fighting one of their rival, or someone who's making threats against them. Or someone, you're fighting a Nothic and they know some weird secret about your family. Like, wait a second, maybe we don't want to attack this guy now. What's going on, right? Because I think it's very easy. I think that's a way to make your game feel very scripted. If you put really thick walls between fight and role play and fight, it break those down. Like the entire point of the game is it's very flexible. So if you can introduce that, the barroom brawl where you're looking for some informant and you realize, oh, the guy I'm beating the heck out of, no, this is the guy we need to talk to. Oops, right? Now it makes the role-playing interaction kind of fun, right? Because now maybe you beat this guy up because he insulted you, and the two of you didn't know that, okay, we're supposed to be doing business together, things like that. It makes it a lot more interesting, and that makes it stand out. And then you have a really good relationship with that NPC that's fun as a DM to play off of, things like that. So I think being able to tie combat and role-playing together, don't think of them as separate activities. Do what you can to merge them.
When I'm doing my prep work, a lot of times what I'll do is I try and force myself to remember, every fight takes place for a reason, right? Like there's not, the fights don't just break out for no apparent reason at all. Even a random encounter in a dungeon occurs for some reason. Like, oh, okay, the Sturges are coming after these guys because they're hungry, right? And you want to, think about the encounter in those terms. Like, okay, these Sturges are hungry. What are some things I can do in putting together this environment, in this encounter, that will make that more apparent, or make it easier for the players to play off of that fact, right? Because, like, Sturges are hungry, so if they smell blood, they're all going to swarm this one person, right? Or you can throw them off scent by splashing blood on the walls, or I don't know, I'm just making things up now, right? But there's thinking about it like that there's an objective behind everything that happens, whether it's the player objective or the monster objective or NPC's objective, and then thinking about like what can I do to make achieving that objective harder, or making achieving the objective easier or more exciting or more interesting. And that's where you end up with like environmental things like, okay, our objective is get to the other side of this room. What do I need to do? Make it hard for the players to get to the other side of that room, right?
Yeah.
Like that's like having an objective in mind is more important than just having a fight.
And I think having that detail of like a motivation or a reason why something's happening, it helps get around the sort of like the situation as a DM you can fall into where there's really only one answer to a situation,
Yeah.
right? It's easy to say, oh, there's these Sturges in here and they're hungry, and all you really can do is fight them. Where I think D&D really shines when the players are thinking three-dimensionally, where it might be, oh, we fought these orcs, earlier, ambushed us. Well, we know the Sturges are hungry, that we figured that out. Let's drag a couple of the orc corpses here and lay them out, and we know the Sturges might ignore us, or something like that. And the players feel clever, and your world feels more real, because now the players are connecting the dots between each part of your adventure into a cohesive whole, rather than just like a video game going, well, now we're in this scenario, how do we clear it out? Okay, now it's the next one again, those thick walls, right, that I think really can make a campaign feel a little too predictable and a little too linear.
So we talked a little bit about roleplay, so I'm going to ask my next question, which I got from the Twitch audience, thank you. So when you have new players and you want to encourage roleplay out of them, what do you guys do? And
Role play, set an example.
Yeah.
So have the NPCs talk to them and draw out that dialogue. When we are doing a combat scene, I'll be very descriptive about what happens. I try and get them to describe if they do a crit. I'm like, okay, and maybe if it's going to be the crit that kills the character or the NPC or the monster, I'll have them describe it, and I'll usually give them a hint that how does your death blow play out, and let them act it out or talk about it.
Yeah, I actually found with new players, since they have no preconceptions, it's actually easier to get them to roleplay.
Yeah.
Like once you give them permission. I remember running these guys had never played a role-playing game before. This is years ago, and we were playing like this modern day game. And the first combat starts. I'm like, I'm nervous. This guy's never played a role-playing game. Okay, it's your turn. These guys, they have guns pointed on you. What do you do? And I barely finished asking what he do. He's like, okay, I'm going to kick the gun out of the first guy's hand, and when it's in the air, I'm going to grab it and point it at the other guy. And it was like this very cinematic action movie role-playing game. So I'm like, that's totally what you should be doing. Right? Whereas people who played a lot of games were like, well, I don't know, what's the probability and the chances? And what are the rules for this? Like, it was he just dove right into it. We just thought,
just try it.
Yeah, like this is like an action movie. If my character's an action hero, what we do? These two guys have guns pointed at him. Well, this is what he does, right? And that was great. So I think it's always just setting the tone and like kind of just try, and also keeping the language in terms of like, don't devolve into gameese. Just focus on playing like. Imagine you're a character, this is the kind of story that's being told, what would that character do? Things like that. I think that kind of helps new players, because it gives them, I think you want to give them enough of a framework without telling them what to do, right?
Yeah.
Just give them like, here's the kind of the prerequisites for how you should think about this, then go ahead and do whatever you want.
The visuals are, sorry, Rodney.
No, go ahead.
I was just thinking when one of you had said that you describe, or you have the player describe it. I remember the second Dungeon Master. It was Chris Young's, and when I hit something with a fireball or something, he actually described what happened, the moment of impact, the fireball, and what happened to the monster, and how he reacted, and what he sounded like when he was getting burned to bits, and all that. I was like, oh my god, all right. Because previously I was playing with someone who was like, okay, you hit, next, all right. And I think that really does help the setting the example, because after hearing and seeing how what I was doing in the game was affecting other people in the game. It made me want to be more descriptive with the things that I was doing too.
Because the DM sets the energy level for the table.
That's definitely true.
Right? And if you're just mailing it in, the players will do that too. But if you're really putting yourself out there and putting energy into it, and it's harder obviously as a DM because you're describing everything. Players just have one set of actions.
Yeah, I find DMing exhausting sometimes because I try and force myself to be on, right? Because I want to pump up the players and get them excited, and that's why I tend to be very animated and like try and put a lot into my voice, even if it is artificial, because that sort of elevates the entire energy level. And I think with new players, there's sort of two key things you have to do to get a new player used to the role-playing aspects of the game, and that is you have to make them comfortable, right? Because in a lot of ways, you're coming into a situation, especially if there's other players that have already played before, you're coming to a situation where they're all very comfortable with this game and it's a totally new experience for that person, and when you're not comfortable in a situation you tend to clam up and get defensive, right? So you want to make them comfortable, and I do that by encouraging my other players that are on the table to basically say, hey, it's totally okay to roleplay your character, and get them doing that. The other thing is I like to show a new player that there are benefits and rewards to actually jumping into character, and Fifth makes this easy with inspiration, right? But like basically I actually have a brand new player in my Greyhawk campaign right now, and she has just only been playing with us for a couple of months, and she's kind of slowly getting into the whole role-playing aspect of it. And so last session there was a kind of scary monster situation, and she turned and bolted and said, and I run off screaming, where's my mom? Right? And it was great because she's playing like a street urchin type character, and it was totally great. And I was like, here's your inspiration because you just ditched the party in the middle of this scary situation, and it was awesome.
Where are you going?
One of the other things I remember that helped, because I always had a little, I was just clammed up when I was a theater major, for God's sakes, and this should be right up my alley, but I didn't know how to be my character, and it was hard, and it felt a little awkward. But one of the things that really helped, and again, this was in Chris Young's game, was he told us before we played together that each of us had to secretly go to another player and find a way that we were linked together. Anything that happened like in our past, or we were related or something, and then just going into the game and immediately having that connection with another player, it just felt like you were already had something to hold on to. It just helped really get into character, and I just felt like really connected to everybody because of that.
Yeah, that's a great technique, and I actually use that same technique at the start of all my campaigns.
Do you really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, the character in question that ran off and screaming is actually my sister in the game.
Oh, really?
Yes. And we just figured this out, by the way. We had,
You figured it out for sure.
yes, we had dinner plans with Daddy, the Demon Lord.
Dinner with grass.
Did you figure it out because you and her figured it out, or because Rodney had planned it out?
Because Daddy told us.
Oh, by the way, you're related. Ha.
Yeah.
There's sort of family resemblance as well, so that doesn't hurt.
Yeah, at the start of the game, they're both playing tieflings, and at the start of the game, they had kind of decided, like, oh, we're gonna, make it so our characters might be related, and I was just like, yes, they are.
Oh, okay. Do you ever do that also, like, in the middle of a game or the middle of a campaign, you see some cool connection between players, and you just kind of decide, hey, guess what? 20 years ago, you robbed this guy's father, and he's been searching for you ever since.
If I think the players will be into it, yeah, but something that is really like world shaking, like if that would totally rock their world, I want to give it a little bit more time to percolate than just like, oh, that's true.
That's a great idea.
Especially they form such a connection to their character. You don't want to change it in a way that they wouldn't be comfortable with or accepting of.
Another way, besides having them put links to each other, is to have that central NPC, like your Professor Xavier character or whatever, that everybody in the party has a link to, even if they're all a little bit different, so that they all come together over one NPC that you have. So, and then they really treasure that person when you kill them.
Also a reference to our campaign.
We're actually skirting around.
He's doing it.
Yeah, he is. He's excited about another character getting killed off in the game. He's not even running.
That's right.
This is our DM, folks. But this is skirting around another topic that is super popular. That's already been asked on the Twitch channel as well. And it's been in an article that Rodney covered. But I want to get answers from each of you. What do you do what tips and tricks do you use when you're creating a new campaign, when you're sitting down to play a new session, what do you do to make it easier to help your players out? All that stuff. What tips and tricks would you share with the gamers here?
I usually give them a little bit of background about the adventure or the campaign, and then ask them to create background stories for their characters that tie into that. And that way, as we're moving through the campaign, I can bring those elements in, or I can refer to it, or they're going to run into some bad guy from their past that, if it's one of our published adventures or something, I'll take one of those NPCs and turn him into that person from their past, and loop it in. So I think that helps engage them early on in the campaign.
Yeah, giving the players some context for what it is that you intend to run is really important, so that they will work with you to make characters that fit in with your setting. So my home game right now is literally a crater filled with a city that survived some kind of post-apocalyptic fantasy post-apocalyptic thing that happened, right? Which nobody knows about. They know about the thing that happened. They just don't know what it was. And I said, you guys are all either, constables, or you're people who work like on contract for the constables. Figure out which one you are and why. And then they just sort of went about this machination as a group, figuring out who was actually a member of the constabulary and who was actually just a contractor. And it created an interesting dynamic in the group between the different players who were and weren't and so forth.
Yeah, I think having like a few key elements, like really big things that tie to the campaign that are going to come up again and again. So I'm actually creating a campaign right now, and one of the conceits behind it is it's a city that's ruled by vampires, but nobody has ever seen the vampires. Nobody knows who the vampires are, but everyone knows there are agents of the vampires in the city. And so the idea is that's one of the kind of the three factions. But the idea is you could easily tie a player, like a character who might want revenge against a vampire, or might be secretly a minion of a vampire, or things like that. So it's something which everyone knows. Hey, in this campaign, the vampire lords are really important, and so then making sure, then characters are then tied to them in some way, either working with them, working against them, have a grudge against them, or even just the first, the initial adventure seeds will kind of tie somehow to these machinations between them, and then that being something that is easy for the players to hook onto and understand, rather than giving them like 12 smaller things. It's like one or two big things.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I actually do the exact same thing, and I use the bonds in 5th edition. The idea of your ideal, your flaw, and your bond. At the start of my campaign, I handed out a sheet that's like, okay, here are 10 things that I think will be relevant to this campaign. Like, I planned out some adventures, but I don't really know where things are going to go. And it was things like one of them was Ayus, and one of them was the City Watch, and one of them was the Society of Magi, and it was all basically like a one-paragraph description of like, here, I think these guys are going to be relevant, but I'm going to let you guys tell me if you think they're interesting by saying if you choose one of these as your bond, right? And everybody chose some variant of one of those 10 different things, but like 2 or 3 people chose the Thieves Guild, and so obviously the Thieves Guild is going to play a much bigger role in the campaign than the Church of Farlingen that no one chose, right? So there's, it kind of lets them tell me back what they're interested in and shape how the campaign's going to shake out from there.
So I think we take a lot of liberties when we talk about campaigns and adventures and encounters and throw all these words around. But for somebody who's new to Dungeons and Dragons, for somebody who's potentially new to becoming a dungeon master, what exactly does it mean for them when you say, I'm creating a campaign? Like, that is a pretty broad term, and there's a lot of work that goes into creating a campaign. But what exactly is it that you're doing?
So I think the campaign.
And any tips you have for people who are about to start?
Embark.
Yeah.
The long journey to becoming a master. So I think for me, I think of a campaign as it's almost like a TV show, where it's like, what is the central conceit of the stories that you're going to tell? And then from there, the adventures are the specific stories that take place in the campaign. So, and I think campaigns can be like they can be based on an event. Like, there's a war going on, so my campaign is about this war. Mm-hmm. The one I'm working on now is, I just like the idea of if you put vampires in a fantasy world and they were real, what would happen? Well, if they end up running a city, what would that look like? So that's the shtick behind this campaign is it's a city not secretly ruled by secret vampires, kind of weird, or whatever. Yeah, and what does that look like? And then what happens? You know, so you almost think of it as that's like the genre you're building. And I think what really helps is just have one strong idea that interests you, and then run with that.
Yeah, I think you could approach it either as a bunch of stories or things that are going to progress to an ultimate goal or an end game, or you can just address it like a campaign setting. Like, I just enjoy this world and the types of magic that their characters are going to encounter, and I'm just going to make fun things for them to be involved in as they progress through the levels. And maybe as you move through it, you identify things that they're really interested in, and you form some sort of end goal out of that, but maybe it's not apparent up front in your campaign.
You can almost think of it as like at least my experience, the two basic frameworks are like Lord of the Rings, where this is the campaign where you're trying to defeat Sauron, and then Star Trek, where this is a campaign that takes place in a future kind of, here's society, and here's what you are, Starfleet officers, you're exploring the cosmos and things like that.
Yeah.
Where Star Trek doesn't really end. There's no, where Lord of the Rings kind of does. Once the ring is destroyed, it's really...
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to run a campaign right now that is sort of a third type of campaign, and that is, here is the blank slate. You guys drive a lot of the action, right? Like, I'm trying to, and we'll see how this goes, but I'm trying to basically let the players tell me what their ambitions and drives and things like that are. Like, do you want to run the Thieves Guild, or do you want to have a standing army, or whatever, and then let the players drive that. I don't know that that's necessarily different from the second one you said.
It's like the Star Trek kind of one.
It is, yeah, but I'm trying to be very hands-off with how things progress. Or rather, be very reactive with how things progress, I should say that.
I've got a question that might be tough for us. We're lucky in the fact that we're surrounded by people who play D&D or have been playing role-playing games or games for a while. But as DMs, you don't always have that luxury. Like, sometimes you'll be getting new players and they may not be super comfortable, or you may have problem players at the table. So one of the questions.
Some people here probably have.
Yeah, well, I am at times a problem player, but for different reasons. As Rodney points to me. But how would you deal with that? What advice would you give to DMs who might be having that player at their table? And I don't mean necessarily the guy who's acting out and needs to be silenced. So that's an option. The question here was like the guy who doesn't ever want to be attacked and whines every time he's attacked, for example.
Just kill his character, probably. He's attacked again.
It's bad sushi one day.
Yeah, right.
At a time.
But you form that new group, and you might have that player or two who for some reason isn't fitting in quite well. What kind of tips would you give DMs to help integrate that player?
It's hard.
I told you this was a hard one for us.
No, but some of it is just typically people play D&D with their friends, but their friends might not. They might not always be a good match for we want to play D&D with. So I just think of a mutual friend of Rodney's and I, who when we play online video games with him, likes to just wander off. We're like, hey guys, I'm gonna help you go through this part of this MMO, whatever. And
I think we were talking about him earlier before the podcast started.
Yeah, we might have been. Where did he go? He's not here, and what are we doing, right? And so part of it kind of depends on how much you can tolerate disruption in your campaign. Is your game kind of casual and social, and so people are, I don't want to get attacked, whatever, who really cares, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if it's making it unfun, I think the important thing is it making it unfun for the other players? Mm-hmm. And is it making it unfun for you? If it's supposed to be this is a real dungeon crawling game, and that player wants to go charging into the room with the monsters, and then no, I shouldn't be attacked, and they get all whiny about it, then it's just...
you're attacking me again because you're in the way.
Yeah.
You're in the way.
It's hard because it's always hard to find players. Mm-hmm. And so you always want to try to, how can I reform someone? I think, and you're really just talking about interpersonal relationships, how to not be jerks, which is something which society, we still haven't figured out. It's been how many tens of thousands of years, and we still don't have an answer to that. Yeah. So, but I think a big thing is just, if the player's doing something irritating, just, what's actually kind of interesting, this sounds kind of weird. But when we started live streaming games, I found it made me a much better DM, because I could actually watch myself DM and go, wow, this is stuff I do. Maybe if you could, try, maybe even though it's publicly streaming it, capture your game, and stream it. And then if the player's being whiny and they're seeing people on, say, Twitch complain about them, and then maybe they're seeing it themselves. I don't know. Sometimes
all right. So you hear folks publicly shame your player. publicly shame them,
But
and then they'll get in line.
No, do not do that.
it might be something where the player might not realize how disruptive it is, right? Until
Yeah.
they're like, oh yeah, I went back and watched the game and realized it is irritating. I'm always hogging the limelight, or I'm not letting I talk over other people, or things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the best way to solve it.
So I'm very fortunate in that I haven't had a problem player in a very long time.
Now that
Why are
I'm
you-
Now that Mike is out of my campaign.
Well, Mike did the NC.
Yes.
Was he? And I wouldn't say that was a problem, but that was like the least serious character at the table. I enjoyed it. I was sitting over there and I loved the crap out of it.
The steel tuxedo.
Yeah, but
Yes.
there were definitely people who watched the stream who were like, "Why is he at the table?"
Well, that-
hey, so not everyone plays D&D for fun.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes D&D is very serious business,
You know,
right?
if they don't enjoy,
As an aside, I actually got messages on Twitter from people saying like, "Why did Mike try and ruin your game?" And I was just like, "It's fine. That's Mike. He's cool."
no ruining
Anyways,
I got fan mail for that character too.
That's right.
Some people could
He
appreciate
was
it.
he was a polarizing character.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Like, and I can't say he was bad, but it was definitely the crowd was either like, "He's awesome," or
Well,
otherwise.
the game's very different. Not everyone likes playing D&D the same way.
Yep.
It's just a matter of what's your group's taste. Because I mean, the character I played in your home campaign was
Right.
not was very
Yes.
not crazy like that. But
It-
the
I
different
like-
crazy,
Yeah.
different crazy.
Different
I
Yeah,
like
he
in
was.
real life.
Yeah, you.
I like some people in real life. I don't like them as D&D players.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's not
true.
always true
Yeah.
because friendships do not always translate to good D&D partners.
There are people. I was at pub trivia last night, and there was a table with people who happened to win. I'm sure they're nice people, but like, dude, if you win pub trivia, you don't stand up and cheer and high five each other.
No.
Like, that's a little like, really? Enjoy the $10 gift card.
You have to understand that
Like,
this was in a pub, right?
yeah.
They've been drinking. It's
So-
celebratory.
to risk getting us back on topic, all I was going to say was I haven't had a bad player in a really long time, but one of the things that I used to do when I would run into this problem is the first thing I do is I go to all the other players and say, "Hey, am I crazy? Like, is the problem actually me?" Because there were a couple of times where the answer was yes, it's me being oversensitive, right? Or me, I'm kind of ignoring a thing, and so getting the perspective from my other players sometimes made me realize that I needed to adjust my expectations a little bit, and then sometimes they would be like, "No, actually, this guy's ruining the game for us. You should, have a talk with him," and then at that point, I start thinking about external measures. But I always start with that sort of self-evaluation.
A lot of times you can also prevent issues by establishing expectations. Like when you're starting a new campaign and you are giving them context for the campaign, it's good to have like some of that stuff and some of the elements and themes and tropes and things you plan on using written up that you can pass up to your players and say, this is what you can expect from this game, right? So later on, when they become a pain in the ass, you can go back to that sheet and pull it out and go, look, this is what I explained to you that you could expect. Now, if your character doesn't fit in with this, let you and I work together to build you a character that does, and then we'll figure out a nice, clean exit strategy and entry strategy for your character to make you have fun, so that you're not making everybody else's life miserable, which is what you're doing right now.
No. So Chris is very direct in his method.
I am, but I'm a big fan of tough love, and usually if you're in my game, you're probably a pretty close friend as it is.
Yeah.
And so we already have that relationship built up where I can be kind of a jerk in my delivery, and it's cool.
Yeah, that was actually the thing that I learned because I'm not very confrontational when it comes to dealing with issues like that. So it took me a while to get to the point where I was comfortable talking to the person about this issue that I might have seen. And that, honestly, like 90% of the time, just having the discussion fixed all the problems that we had at the table.
Yeah.
So I know that's not something we talk about very often. It can be hard to go one-on-one with a person who's your friend and be like, hey, so you're doing this thing that's not necessarily great. Why? And then just start the discussion there. But
Yeah.
Sarah, I think, could chime in too on some of these things.
I've been lucky that I haven't had any bad
awesome.
players, so yeah.
I think
So
it's
really-
rarer than you think. I think a lot of times when you
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
online people, it's more,
And never discount the value of like out of game like group building, right?
Yeah.
So like we're gonna have this night where we just decide tonight that we're all just gonna skip the game, but we're also gonna hang out and we're gonna have pizza and beers and watch some really stupid movie or play video games or whatever, right? To just kind of hang out and be ourselves with each other, so they can all see, hey, that's actually my character, not me. I'm
Yeah.
actually a really nice person. My character's a jerk.
yeah.
I think some people like to, I don't know, explore other parts of their personality through their D&D character, obviously, but like some people who just aren't jerks in real life just feel like they can take liberties I think I've been emotionally scarred by some of the people I've played with. This one person keeps coming to mind. I won't name names.
Listen, I apologize for that.
Robbie Thompson.
It was me.
We nicknamed his character Sunshine, and that because everybody hated him, but and he hated the nickname, and we were just like, we're just gonna keep calling you Sunshine
Oh,
because we hate you.
good times. Good times. Let's use one of your questions while I gather some more questions from Twitch here.
So, obviously, you all didn't just. Maybe you did. I'm not going to make assumptions, but just start dungeon mastering by creating these big, lavish campaigns. So if somebody is new to DMing, they want to get their feet wet, what's the best way for them? What's a good way for them to start? Published adventures, just...
I think so, because it's less risk for you. You know, you prep it and you run it, and then you start to learn how to put stuff together yourself. And if things go wrong, you can always say, "Well, it's the way the adventure's written, guys. Sorry."
Wrote this.
It's a good way to start with an example. Start with a published adventure, particularly if it's one that's like now that we have the interwebs, which we didn't have back in 1980, by the way. You can go online and you can say, "Hey, what's the best adventure?"
Yeah.
Right? And you can find one that's really good, and you can have a look at it, and you can go, "Oh, I see what they're doing here." After you've read it, and then you run the adventure, and you get the experience under your belt. And you continue doing that, you get a better sense of what it takes.
Yeah, or just watching streams, of people running D&D games, and if they're running a published campaign, you can say, "Oh, this is how someone actually handled this specific stuff I'm going to run." So it gives you a sense of, you're a little bit more prepped for it.
Yeah, you can find a lot of that now.
Yeah.
A published campaign basically saved D&D for me when I was in college. Like I was having a really hard time with my campaign. I was working 2 jobs. I was still a full-time student, and it was like I just couldn't find the time to prep. But I was sort of the anchor of the group, so if I didn't run, no one would run. And so we were actually kind of about to disband when I started running the Shackle City campaign, which was in Dungeon Magazine, and just having that full-length campaign to run really took a lot of the burden off of me as a person. I'm 20 years old trying to make it through college and run D&D and work 2 jobs, and it was just super stressful. I think that it's still stressful today. Now, 15 years later, I have a job and this and that and everything else. So having that other thing to fall back on takes a lot of the pressure off of you, so you can really focus on what's happening in the session, as opposed to having to spend a lot of time away from the table thinking about it. And you can just really focus on having a good time at the table.
Yeah.
So a published campaign is a fantastic place to start if you're just getting started. And then start working on your own personal campaign on the side while you're running that one. I'm already working on my next campaign while running my current one, so.
It never stops.
My first campaign was a homebrew campaign, but I had time on my hands to be able to do that. But now I've found, just the last few months or so, my workload has been a little heavier, other stuff going on, and so I haven't had the time to prep. So the published Horde of the Dragon Queen adventure has been a lifesaver. It's just I can pull it out, read through the next couple bits of the episode, and be ready to run the adventure that night.
Do you have favorite adventures that you've run in your careers as dungeon masters?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
I can't tell you what they are.
It's top secret.
I don't want to know. I just want to know if you have favorites.
Yes.
If you know his favorite adventures, you own his.
You have power over it.
Stuff.
I'll tell you, Ghost Tower of Inverness is one of my favorite adventures ever.
Really?
Right behind it is White Plume Mountain.
He's mocking you, by the way.
Yeah.
No, actually, so Ghost Tower is a great adventure once you have digested it, because it is wacky.
It is a very wacky adventure. It is fun. That and White Plume Mountain are my 2 favorite adventures.
White Plume is great.
White Plume was crazy.
My favorite adventure is an adventure from the Shackled City campaign called Test of the Smoking Eye, and it takes place on Occipitus, which is this layer of the abyss where the players have to go around and basically they participate in this sort of test of worthiness that a demon lord has put in place on this layer of the abyss, and it led to easily the most memorable moment I've ever had in Dungeons & Dragons, and it was pretty spectacular. It's a great adventure in the first place. It's got great NPCs, and it was the first 3rd edition adventure that I'd ever run that really left a lasting impression on my campaign. Now, this is all part of a single ongoing campaign, so theoretically everything's building on everything else, but it was that adventure that there's a few things that happened in that adventure that just caused characters in my game to veer off in totally different directions.
Mm-hmm.
Their story arcs are going all along fine, and then all of a sudden, off in a different direction, and it's a really great adventure.
What about you, Mike?
I always like the Village of Hamlet. It's a classic.
Oh, there you go.
It's a fun one, though. It's actually, and then kind of segues into the Temple of Elemental Evil. I've had a lot of fun with Against the Giants. The Steeding of the Hill Giant Chieftain is so much fun because it's so open-ended. You never know what's going to happen. That's what I wish we had live streamed. We played tested.
Yeah.
Did you play in that?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
At one point we had a running tally on the board. The players had like destroyed 5 beds, like murdered 3 wolves, and still hadn't killed a giant after like 2 or 3 sessions.
I walked in on one of those sessions to talk about some work stuff, and I think you were talking about like there was a tally and like they still haven't fought. They were talking to a giant at some point. Like they still haven't fought a single giant.
It was alongside the giants, really, is what it was.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, how can we help you?
Alongside the giants.
I always liked the Forge of Fury. It's another one I ran as a 5e playtest. I had a lot of fun with that one. And let's see, what other ones I've run like multiple times. I'm trying to think of the a lot of I like shorter adventures, ones that are more focused. Dungeons. I think there's the sample dungeon, which actually the map is in the DMG, and it was described in the 3rd and 1st edition DMGs, and then published in Dungeons, stocked by Jonathan Tweed. It was like Monastery of the Fire Opal or something like that. It's just a dungeon with stuff in it. But I always just love stocking that map and running it. It's always just fun.
Sort of why I like the was it B1?
Search the Unknown.
Yeah, Search the Unknown. Yeah.
So
Undermountain, I think, is one of my favorite places to. I mean, no actual, published adventure, but just that as a setting, it's so much fun.
That was my first book was that I ever bought was a DM adventure, and it was City of the Gods. So it was just this, and it was all like alien stuff. So I was like, this is awesome, and I was like, oh wait, this isn't exactly typical D&D. But the next thing that I actually bought as I started running stuff was the Undermountain box set, right? And you open up that map. And it's like the stuff that it's a cooler version of the stuff you draw while you're sitting in science class or whatever with like filling out the graph paper. You're like, this is massive, and you have like no explanation of what's going on really at first. You're just like, this is a huge map. Like in this room, the treasure attacks you. You just start making stuff up as you go through, which I thought was amazing. So it's a good one. I got more. I'm gonna mine these guys for all they're worth.
Yes.
Here's a good one, and not to throw your fellow DMs under the bus, so you can pick something that you have seen in yourself. But a pitfall that you might see DMs falling into that might not be the best thing. So a flaw or a bad thing that can happen when you DM, and how you would address it. So you can each pick a different one. So if you go last, you're gonna get screwed. So.
I'll jump in first. No, it's funny because we were talking about mysteries, and the easy one, I played in games where the DM had one solution in mind for a mystery, and if the players missed something, in this case we were playing a game, we missed a clue, because the DM forgot to tell us, like we had searched where the clue was, and he just missed in his notes, we were supposed to find this thing. And so we played for 3 hours, just constantly going back and examining this area again and again and again, and talking to these NPCs again and again and again, because the DM had in his mind, here's the solution, right, and this is what you need to do. And I think as a DM, the more you're prescribing future events, the worse off you are. Because the entire point of playing the game is that the events that are unfolding are unique to that session. And so always avoid like really being very linear, and this must happen, and this, then this, and this, and those events being things that the players then do this, and therefore X happens. Like always avoid that. Always give your players the freedom to choose whatever they want to do. Part of that, you can get around it by just, if there are NPCs doing stuff or events, just create your timeline and have those events occur, and then the players react to them. Or always think in terms like the example I gave earlier, the puzzle, where you could figure out how to solve this room and get the circlet, or you could just beat down the door and escape, right? Like don't always think of like what's the most obvious physical direct solution to this thing. Assume the players might do that, and allow that to be it doesn't have to be the best solution, but it can be a solution.
Cool.
So linear thinking as a dungeon master, stay away from it. So.
Always look at the intelligence stat on the monsters you're running. Always. Because nothing will spoil the game faster as a dungeon master if you run your band of orcs like a highly tactical SWAT team. And wreck their day every time.
Not that you can't have a group of orcs
You could, but if that's the norm, they should have known that to begin with, right? So, one of the things that I like to pay attention to is how smart are my monsters, and some monsters will actually surprise you with how smart they are, and some will surprise you with how dumb they are, and then, make their choices in the game, even if that game is as simple as I'm just running combats, accordingly, right? So, your brute orcs are going to make dumb, decisions, and they're going to fight on pride, and they're going to do all kinds of crazy things that people who are regularly intelligent won't do, and they're going to get killed by the player characters because they're going to make dumb decisions. The player characters are going, oh, I see what you did, nuke, right? But then, of course, don't be afraid when player characters go down in the Underdark to make your drow hyper intelligent and just barbecue your pieces. Absolutely barbecue them. Just pay attention to what your monsters are capable of, and the stats should never be discounted. So it's really important for believability. And to have that scale in your game, too, so people know that there's a scale of smarts for monsters in the game, so they understand when they're dealing with the dragon really, really smart, that this is a problem.
I'd say don't get focused on running your game one way or having one outcome. Similar to what Mike said, your players are they're gonna throw stuff at you constantly that is not what you expected, and you're gonna have to improvise on the fly. And some of it may even, if you're playing a homebrew campaign, it might change things up completely. So you just have to be prepared and don't have that mentality that you can't change things as you go.
Yeah, so there's something I have to constantly remind myself of, and it's something that I'm guilty of, and I've tried to break myself of this habit over the last 5 years or so, and that is, don't save things for later. If you have a good idea, use it now, because your campaign might explode and you'll never play this game again, right? Just use your ideas, because you will always have more ideas. Like, if you're a creative person and you are able to sit down to the table and put together a campaign, you will have more ideas, right? So every time I had that sort of stroke of genius, like, oh, that would be an awesome scene, I try and get into the next session, or maybe 2 sessions down the road, or whatever. Because if I think to myself, okay, I'll save that for later. This will fit in at this adventure at 9th level really well, right? As soon as I start doing that, then I stop coming up with good ideas for that 9th level adventure, right? And things don't get used up, and I create this backlog, or it just never gets used in the first place, right? So I mean, the adventure we ran last week, my Greyhawk campaign is a great example. In between sessions, I was like, man, I'd really like to use Grass in this campaign. I would use Grass in this next session, right? And so, they happen to be in Sigil, the Planescape setting, and taking a slight detour from Greyhawk, and they had dinner with Grass. And I would have 10 years ago, I would have said, dinner with Grass is clearly a 10th level adventure. Save that for later, but
Some of us had dinner with Grass. Other people decided they were just going to sit and watch the rest of us eat. And by the rest of us, I mean me.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's very easy to think okay, this is a good idea, but it's not the good idea for right now. No, this is the good idea for right now. It will be a good idea in one session or 2 sessions. Use your ideas when you have them, because if you're excited about it, your players will get excited about it.
Mm-hmm. That's very good advice.
Well, that was all. I have at one point in my DMing career done all the things you guys have talked about, and looked back later and been like, oh, I should have done this.
Well, sure.
I should have made those goblins a little dumber, right?
That's how we learned it.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't have a very robust history of being a DM, but I have done it, and I was awful.
Oh, whatever.
The first time, I got better because I learned from the first time, but it was similar to what you're saying. Is I only knew one way that this adventure could go, and it didn't from the get-go go that way. It was like the players have to go right, and they went left, and I was lost. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to go home. I forgot I have to go to the dentist.
And then she never came back.
I never did. It was awful. So that was one of the things, though, that James Wyatt said to me was, don't worry about the rules. Just stop. Having the knowledge, the rules knowledge that other dungeon masters do was really plaguing me. I'm not going to know what to do if they do this. And he's like, you don't need to know, just make it up. Pick roll some dice. Just say, they want to go through this door. What's behind the door? Maybe they can't open the door. Maybe they can open the door. So it was very freeing for me as a dungeon master, just to relax a little and just try to have fun.
Here's another one from our Twitch audience that I know I've seen in every long-running campaign I've been in. You'll generally have a player, and it might be done by the DM, that is working against the party in some way, shape, or form. I mean, not necessarily trying to kill the different character, but maybe they are. Maybe they're at odds with their goals, right? But this is something that can be tough for DMs to try to figure out how to get going in a party without getting too adversarial. So do you guys have any tips for how you would handle having that kind of conflict in the party, or even seeding that conflict in the party at sometimes, and how to control it?
When it comes to seeding it, I think you have to follow the Chris Perkins example from our Laundry campaign. That is, you have to choose a player that can play ball, right? That can come in and say, like, okay, you're going to be working against the party, but you're not going to ruin this campaign. You're actually going to make things better, and you're going to make it an interesting part of the story. Because like, in Chris's campaign, he set it up so that my character, my goal was to basically wipe out the entire race of another character. He was playing the Warforged, I was playing the Avenger of the Raven Queen, and it was a whole thing. It was a whole story arc in the campaign. And he picked me because he knew that as a player, I was really interested in conflicts that were sort of the moral quandary, right? Like, do I follow the edicts of my deity, or do I stay loyal to my friend who's in the party, right? And so what I did as a player was I played up that sort of constant back and forth pull between like my duty to my friends and my duty to my deity, and that was interesting. But I would never put that kind of pressure on a player who I didn't think could handle it, or who might be disruptive. Like, I chose to take the sort of inner turmoil angle. Another player might choose to take the, well, I guess I just have to kill all the other players angle, right? So, you know, if you're going to seed it in the party, you have to make sure you can choose a player that is mature enough to make it an interesting party ongoing narrative, and also, you know, not tear the party apart.
Yeah.
Anybody want to add to that?
I was going to say, to go along with that, just make sure that the party that you're playing with at the time is kind of like emotionally prepared for that experience of having one of the other players kind of go rogue on them, right? So if everybody at the party is like, you know, really, really, really friendly, and it's all cool, and you know that this isn't going to, like, you know, like cause diplomacy level, like friendship breakups and stuff like that, then you go for it. You know, it could be really fun, and you know, there could be some high five moments where somebody gets left out.
And I think it's a good idea to try to frame the conflict in a way that ensures, or at least helps ensure that it's not a conflict that would be resolved by the characters fighting each other. Mm-hmm. Like, I think it's more like, well, maybe, like, you know, there's an artifact that one character wants, the others want, you know, things like that from our campaign. Mm-hmm. But even just something like, well, you know, two of the characters want to claim the throne. Well, you know, I guess they could fight over it, but what can you do to ensure that it's not something that's going to end in a direct confrontation? That's combat. Because I actually found combat between players is kind of boring. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just not. It's a DM. It's irritating to run it, and especially with the big judgment calls. You don't want to seem like you're favoring someone.
It becomes a my dad can beat up your dad. It's like,
yeah.
Was my character sheet better than your character sheet? Okay, sweet.
Yeah. I think it's more interesting when it's in the story layer. So.
Cool. I got more. You got anything you want to ask before I keep diving in here?
I'm just curious if what are your favorite monsters to put in your campaigns?
I love mind flayers. They're monstrous, but they're also great villains, and they can make puppets of NPCs. I love this sort of idea that anyone you meet might secretly be under the influence of mind flayers. And vampires are kind of like this too, right? Where they're multi-layered in that they are a bad guy themselves, but they also have people that are working for them, and you don't always know who they are, right? And so I love that sort of alien psychic horror angle from the mind flayer.
Mike, do you have a favorite?
I always like the ogre mages, onies, whatever term you use. I like the dichotomy between a big brutish monster that's also very smart, has a variety of magical abilities. I always find that interesting.
Not the koala.
Not the koala.
We may have set him up for that one.
Yeah. They're the quest givers.
There you go.
They'll fight the koala. So.
I couldn't kill a koala.
I love dragons. I mean, it's just, you know, you can use the dragon in so many different ways. They can be guarding their hoard of treasure. They can be, wreaking havoc on a town. They're ridiculously powerful, magic. They can take different forms, and it just adds so much interest to the story, especially if you can introduce that dragon early on in the campaign and then bring it in as more of a fightable threat later on.
I have been known to lean really heavily on undead in my games, and the more incorporeal, the better. It comes down to, I mean, whoever thought of dropping player characters into a big tank full of water and then introducing a wraith to that scenario? I mean, just like watching my players' eyes bug out. I realize there are some restrictions that they are under that this other creature is not.
Even just like the drowned, right? That was a horrible like undead. I was like, why are we fighting this thing?
They were one of the best monsters ever.
Pretty much fighting anything in the element that you're not meant to be in was the nightmare for any of my characters. So, I'll get that. I was also expecting you to say Yuan-Ti. I've seen you use them so many times.
I dig me some Yuan-Ti. They're not my favorite, but I'd say they're my top 5.
Yeah. They're up there with Illithid for me because again they're smart, kind of like master race. Like they're doing things in the background to make everything go to their whims. So
they're smart.
It's an interesting thing here. So we're getting close to time. We got about 10 minutes. So I'll try to ask a softball question. So let's keep this one relatively fast if we can, and then I'll ask a less softball question. So what kind of things would you do to set the mood for a certain kind of game? Like let's say you got a horror type game. Other tricks you would use for setting the mood for a horror game.
I use background music. I have an MP3 player in my game room that I use.
Do you have a soundtrack you could share?
I have
right now, but
I went through my entire iTunes library at one point, which contains a lot of movie and video game soundtracks. And I just went track by track, and I was like, okay, what's the mood of this? And so like I would add it to a playlist. It's like, okay, this is ambient, or this is tavern, or this is action, or this is tense horror, or something like that. And some things went into like 2 or 3 categories, right? So.
Yeah, I think for horror, you want to make sure the environment's nice, like the lighting isn't too bright, but not so dim that you can't see your dice.
it's a 20, I swear.
Yeah.
Keep rolling 20s.
It's so weird.
I think a lot is just in presentation as a dungeon master. If you're doing a horror game, just really you can't like break character and tell lots of jokes. Like
don't laugh a whole lot at the end.
And the players will do that, so you gotta try to make sure you're not derailing the mood.
So see, sometimes D&D is serious business.
It can be. It's not. I don't know if it's serious business, but yeah, I think especially with the horror games, much it's just the tone. Make sure everyone knows they're playing a horror game and they bought into it. So.
Yeah, be consistent with your descriptions of the environment, I think. So if it's going to be a horror setting, then, everything's kind of dim and shadows everywhere, and, you're not trusting anybody around you because you never know if they're going to, show their fangs.
I'm going to run you on the music, but also one of the things particularly about horror is, which I love to run horror, is you have to be patient to before you deliver that punch. You have to let them really get into the setting. You have to let them walk all the way into the trap before you spring the lid and then you realize, oh my gosh, we're in trouble, right? And sometimes it's as painstaking as giving them several nights, maybe even a whole week in game of things like being very peaceful and calm and gaining the player character's trust before you stick it to them.
Yeah, one other thing I will add is do some research. I've gotten a lot of traction out of finding other role-playing games that have maybe a different tone and playing them, or a board game, or whatever, right? And playing them and learning from them, because a lot of these games are designed specifically for one genre, whereas D&D can sort of cover multiple genres. But if you can look at what that game does well for that genre, sometimes it'll give you ideas of what to port over to D&D.
So this last one I'm going to end on. It might take a little bit. We're going to start with Chris, because Chris is the one that has to be for sure.
Sure.
But out of all the things you said, so think about what's been said, one more piece of advice that you want to give to all the DMs out there before you leave for the day.
Do not forget at any point that you have unlimited resources to do whatever you want. This is good, it's freeing, and it's also dangerous at the same time. It's freeing in that you should never be intimidated by the player who steps up to your table and says, my character is the most badass, blah, 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 blah. And you're just kind of that's really cool. And you can say, genuinely, that's really cool, knowing in the back of your mind that you can summon enough firepower to crush them in less than a melee round. Right? Not that you want to, and that's the other point of it. Be careful, because you do have all that cosmic power, as it were, to not crush your players unknowingly, right, and make the game not fun for them. You want to make it challenging, but you don't want it to be overwhelming.
I'd say remember that it's shared storytelling. Engage your players as much as possible in that. It's try and keep an eye out for what's fun for them, and if you're going off track and it's not, you can tell it's not fun for them, then change it up.
I'd say when you're preparing an adventure, prepare breadth rather than depth. In my own notes, I've run like dungeons that are 30 rooms with no more than a line or two of notes for each room. Just general things where don't worry about anyone else having to read it. As long as you can read it and understand what the gist of it is, then you're good. So, and that kind of helps see if the players go in a weird direction. You're not worried because you haven't put too much prep into anything. So if they go in one weird direction, you don't feel like you're losing work.
I would say pacing is everything. When I am running a game, like I was talking about earlier, how I really try and be on and project and keep people excited. Like that keeps the energy up on the player side of things, but you also need to watch and see like when people are flagging or their interest is drifting, because at that point that should be an indicator to you that it's time to shake things up. And like the big 30-room dungeon is a great example. Like a lot of times I'm tempted to say like, well, they're in the middle of this dungeon. There's really not much I can do to change up the pacing. No, there absolutely is, right? Like, oh, some orcs kicked down the door. There weren't orcs here before. No, now there are. And then that becomes interesting. Like, what are these orcs doing here? And of course, the players then jump in and fill in all the blanks. Like, oh, obviously these orcs were working with the mind flayers. I'm like, yes, they were.
Ultimate power.
Yeah, but I mean, like that paying attention to the energy level of your players is really, really important, because everyone's there to have a good time, and that includes the dungeon master. So that's why in my prep article I talk about the interludes that I can drop in really fast. I like to make sure that my players are always interested, even if they're not necessarily active, right? And so sometimes I will just throw random things in there that make people scratch their heads that I have no idea how it's going to play out, right? Like, and then someone shows up claiming to be your father, right? And it's like, what, is he really? And I have no idea. Right? Like, he might be.
Are they excited about this idea?
Are you interested in this concept? No, you don't care? Okay, he's not your dad. I'm being flippant, but I'm also completely serious.
Yeah.
Like, I just like keeping the players engaged, even if I don't actually have a plan for what comes next, is super important.
Cool.
That was very cool. So I just want to get all marketing-y real quick, but you did bring up your column, which is a new column that we've started running on the website, which is called Behind the Screens, and it is for Dungeon Masters, by Dungeon Masters, tips and advice and all that. And I've had a sneak peek at the next 3, and I love this column. I am so excited about it.
Are you writing the next few ones?
No,
It's
it's
rotating
good.
authors. But everybody has really good advice, and which is evident from this room here too. So.
And another cool thing we're doing with that one, if I remember correctly, is that we're not necessarily going to be picking people from inside the office for all those articles. So you may see us reaching out to people in the community to talk about their DM experience and to share some cool things they've done. So if that's you, look forward to us talking to you, or be like, hey Trevor, why haven't you talked to me? And we'll go from there.
And one very, very last thing, just making sure, because it is Dungeon Master Appreciation Month. Are you all feeling the love?
Feel appreciated?
Appreciated?
We did give the whole team a Valentine's Day yesterday.
That's
so.
true, yeah. I feel very appreciated.
I might need a hug from Trevor, though.
Slow clap, guys. Good job. All right. Well, thank you guys for being here and sharing your awesome advice. And thank you everyone who was watching and asking the questions. And we'll see you next time.
Goodbye, Internet.